Red Skelton was known as the man who could make millions laugh, but behind the laughter there was a life filled with hardship, pain, and secrets that the public never really saw. For 20 years he played the clown on television, the silly drunk, the innocent child, the cheerful entertainer who seemed to carry nothing but joy. But those who worked with him closely, especially during rehearsals, knew a darker side of him. They even called it the Red Skelton dirty hour, a time when his private jokes and behavior would have destroyed his career if the audience ever knew. And when he died, lawyers found a clause in his will that had the power to erase his entire legacy. For America's favorite clown, the truth was far more complicated than the character he showed to the world. Red was born into tragedy. He came into the world on July 18, 1913, in Vincennes, Indiana. His father, Joseph E. Hart, had been a circus clown himself before trying to leave the unpredictable life of the circus to run a grocery store. But fate was cruel. Just 2 months before Red was born, Joseph died in a circus tent collapse, the very world he had tried to escape. That one event shattered the family completely. Red's mother, Ida May, was left to raise 4 children on her own, carrying grief, responsibility, and poverty all at once. Life was brutally hard for them. Ida took whatever jobs she could find, scrubbing floors, working elevators, anything that would put food on the table. The family was so poor that everyone in town noticed. Parents even told their daughters to stay away from young Red, believing he would never amount to anything. That stigma stayed with him, but instead of breaking his spirit, it gave him determination to prove people wrong. From the age of 7, Red was already working. He became a newsboy, standing on the streets shouting headlines, not because he loved it, but because his family needed the money to survive. Each coin mattered. While selling papers, Red discovered something important. He watched people, learned how their faces lit up when they laughed, and figured out how to use humor to get attention. That job wasn't just about selling newspapers, it became his first stage. He realized that laughter was a powerful tool, one that could win people over. That lesson stayed with him for life. Then, at the age of 10, a moment of fate changed everything. One day outside the Pantheon Theatre, Red was selling papers when the famous comedian Ed Wynn noticed him. Wynn bought every paper Red had and then took him inside the theatre. He didn't just give him money, he gave him a glimpse into a different world. Backstage, Red saw the lights, the excitement, the energy of show business, and it hit him like lightning. For a boy who had no father and no future, that small act opened a door that he would chase for the rest of his life. Right after that, Red quit school and jumped headfirst into show business. At just 10 years old, he joined Doc Lewis's traveling patent medicine show. These weren't glamorous performances, they were part sales pitch, part circus, where performers sold fake cures while entertaining crowds. Red traveled across Indiana, Arkansas, Illinois, and Missouri, working night after night as if he were already a grown man. He danced, sang, told jokes, and learned how to grab attention from strangers. His mother once said that Red never ran away from home, it was just that destiny had caught up with him. By 14, Red was working with the John Lawrence Stock Company, performing in serious plays under tents. He made $15 a week, which felt like a fortune at the time. But every time he delivered a dramatic line, the audience laughed. He was supposed to make them cry, but his natural comedy always broke through. Eventually, the company let him go, leaving him stranded in a cheap hotel by the Missouri River. It could have been the end of his dream, but Red wasn't someone who gave up easily. Soon after, he found work on a showboat called the Cotton Blossom, which still carried the old tradition of river entertainment. Red did everything there. He sang, danced, told jokes, and even performed in blackface, which was common at the time. Every crowd was different, and every night forced him to adapt quickly. That boat became his training ground, teaching him more about performing than any school could. By 15, Red was no longer just a beginner, he was a professional entertainer who had already worked in vaudeville, medicine shows, burlesque, minstrel acts, and even circuses. He followed his father's path as a clown but went further, learning how to make entire audiences roar with laughter. During the Depression years, Red even worked as an MC for brutal dance marathons where couples competed until they collapsed from exhaustion. He did whatever it took to keep working and keep moving forward. While most kids his age were still in school, Red was out in the world, learning how to survive through entertainment. Then in 1930, fate brought him something more than just work. It brought him Edna Stillwell. She was just 16 and worked as an usher at the Pantage Theatre in Kansas City. Red was hosting a dance marathon there, and Edna had entered. She didn't just dance, she won. Afterward, she told Red straight to his face that his jokes weren't funny enough. That blunt honesty caught his attention. A year later, the two were married. But Edna wasn't just his wife. She became his manager, his writer, and his business partner. She negotiated better pay for him, wrote his jokes, and even helped him study for a diploma. Even after their marriage ended 13 years later, she continued writing for him, because she knew his comedic rhythm better than anyone else. Together, they came up with a sketch that would change his career. While sitting in a diner in Montreal, they noticed people dunking donuts into coffee. That simple observation sparked the Donut Dunkers routine, where Red acted out different funny ways of dunking donuts. It was pure pantomime, silly and creative, and audiences loved it. The act was booked at Loew's State Theatre in New York in 1937, and suddenly Red and Edna were playing in the big leagues. That one sketch opened the doors to radio, movies, and even performances at the White House. President Franklin D. Roosevelt invited Red to perform at his birthday events, giving him exposure at the highest levels of American society. In 1937, Red's career took a huge leap when he performed the Donut Dunkers routine on the Fleischmann's Yeastar radio show hosted by Rudy Vallee. The simple act translated beautifully to radio, and the response was overwhelming. Fan letters poured in, and he was invited back multiple times that year. Soon after, NBC gave him his own spot as the host of Avalon Time in 1938. Once again, Edna was behind the scenes writing most of his material, making sure his comedy shined. His success on radio proved that his humor wasn't just visual, it worked in every medium. By 1941, Red had landed an even bigger opportunity, hosting the Raleigh cigarette program. This was where he created some of his most famous characters. Junior, the mean little kid, became a national sensation with his catchphrase "I doed it," which was even used in newspaper headlines during World War II. Another character, Clem Cadiddlehopper, was based on a real neighbor Red had known in Indiana. His clean humor made him stand out. While other comedians often used edgy jokes or politics, Red's characters were family-friendly, and that gave him a special place in American homes. At the same time, his film career was taking off. He made his screen debut in 1938 in Having Wonderful Time, alongside Ginger Rogers and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. Though many of his scenes were cut, critics still noticed his comedic timing. Soon after, MGM signed him, and he became one of their most reliable comedy stars, appearing in more than 30 films between 1938 and 1951. Movies like Ship Ahoy, Bathing Beauty, and The Fuller Brushman helped cement his reputation. Bathing Beauty in particular became iconic for launching Esther Williams' career, though the role had originally been written for Red. He became a staple of MGM's comedy productions, loved for his mix of silliness and warmth. But in 1944, just as his career was at its peak, Red was drafted into the U.S. Army. MGM and his sponsors tried to get him a deferment, but it didn't work. His final radio show aired on June 6, 1944, and the very next day he became Private Skelton. Unlike some celebrities who were given easy assignments, Red trained like any soldier, but he was also constantly asked to perform for the troops. Sometimes he did as many as 12 shows a day. The soldiers adored him, but the pressure wore him down. In his diary, he admitted feeling faint and forgetting parts of his act during performances. When he was sent to Italy in 1945, he performed 41 shows in just 6 days. His comedy lifted the spirits of soldiers, but his own health was collapsing. In Naples, he broke down completely and was rushed back home. For 3 months, he stayed in a military hospital, where he developed a stutter and struggled to recover. Though newspapers softened the story, the breakdown left scars. In September 1945, he was officially discharged from the army, joking later that he was the only celebrity who went in as a private and came out as a private too. But behind the humor, the war had changed him deeply. Despite everything, Red didn't waste time. Just 10 weeks after leaving the army, he returned to radio with the Raleigh cigarette program in December 1945. Fans were thrilled to have him back, but those close to him noticed that he was different. The war had left marks on his mind and body that he never fully escaped. Yet he still stood in front of audiences, still made people laugh, and still carried the weight of being America's clown even when, privately, he was anything but. Red Skelton's life was filled with both laughter and deep sadness. He was one of the most famous comedians in America, a man who shaped the way people laughed for decades. But behind the makeup, the silly voices, and the joyful characters, there was also a man who carried heavy grief and private struggles that shaped his work and his personal life. His career on television made him a household name, yet the pain of losing his son, the collapse of his marriage, and the feeling of being abandoned by the industry he helped build stayed with him until his final days. His story is not just about comedy, but about a man who made millions laugh while carrying heartbreak inside. When the Red Skelton show first aired on NBC on September 30, 1951, it was not just another television program, it was an event. Red was already well known from his success on radio and in films, and people across the country were eager to see how his humor would translate to the new medium of television. Thanks to a new technology called the coaxial cable, his show could be broadcast live to homes all across the United States, making it feel like the entire country was laughing together at the same time. In the very first episode, he ended his opening monologue with a gag where he was pulled offstage by two invisible hands. The audience roared with laughter, though the stunt left him injured, forcing him to abandon the bit later on. Still, the impact of that first episode was huge. By the end of the first season, the show had climbed to number 4 in the ratings. At the 1952 Emmy Awards, Red won Best Comedian and the show itself was named Best Comedy, beating out Milton Berle, who had been the undisputed king of television comedy. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. For the next 20 years, Red Skelton became one of the most beloved entertainers on television. His ability to create characters, tell jokes, and mix physical humor with heartfelt moments made him stand out. In 1954, he moved his show from NBC to CBS, where he was given more airtime and greater creative freedom. By 1962, the show expanded to a full hour, airing on Tuesday nights and becoming a family tradition across the country. At its peak in the mid-1960s, it was the second highest-rated show in the entire nation, and it remained in the top 20 for nearly 2 decades. Red was not just an entertainer, he was part of American life. He also pushed television forward in ways few people realized at the time. Between 1955 and 1960, when CBS was hesitant to fully switch to color broadcasting, Red paid for his own color episodes. He wanted his audience to experience the joy and spectacle of comedy in a more vivid way. His investment in color technology proved he wasn't just a performer but also an innovator who believed in the future of television. Yet even as his show thrived, network decisions would later remind him how cold and business-driven the industry could be. In 1970, CBS cancelled the Red Skelton show not because of low ratings, but because they wanted younger, more urban viewers. His audience was considered too old, and in the ruthless world of television, demographics mattered more than loyalty. This sudden decision became part of what was called the Rural Purge, when CBS cancelled several popular shows that appealed to older or rural audiences, including the Beverly Hillbillies and Green Acres. Red was heartbroken. 4 years, he had been at the top of his field, and now he was cast aside because he didn't fit the network's new vision. Among all the characters Red created, one stood out as the most loved and meaningful, Freddie the Freeloader. First introduced in 1952, Freddie was a silent tramp clown who lived in a shack but always managed to smile despite his poverty. Red based the character on his father, who had been a circus clown before dying shortly before Red was born. Freddie was not just another character, it was a piece of Red's soul. The silent spot, in which Freddie performed wordless sketches using only expressions, gestures, and movement, became one of the show's trademarks. Through Freddie, Red showed that humor didn't always need words, and he reminded audiences that hope could exist even in the hardest of circumstances. In 1981, years after his show ended, Freddie returned in his own HBO special, proving that the character still lived in people's hearts. For Red, Freddie was the purest of his creations because he reflected kindness, hope, and resilience. But offstage, tragedy struck in the most painful way possible. On May 10, 1958, Red's only son, Richard, died of leukemia just 10 days before his 10th birthday. The boy never fully understood how sick he was, because Red and his wife Georgia tried to protect him from the truth. Still, the endless transfusions and the pain took their toll. In his final hours, Richard asked his father for a simple favor. "Daddy, will you get Mama that red blanket for Mother's Day?" His thoughts, even as he was dying, were not for himself but for his mother. Those words became some of his last before he fell into a coma and passed away at 8:36 p.m. The Skeltons sat by his bedside surrounded by his toys and stuffed animals, including the dog he had loved since he was 6. Georgia later admitted that she tried not to cry in front of him, because Richard had asked her not to, but after his passing she broke down. The red blanket he requested became a powerful symbol of love and remained with Georgia for the rest of her life. Red, devastated, left Richard's room untouched. He kept it exactly as it had been, with toys, clothes, and even a packed bag waiting for a birthday that would never come. He often sat in the room alone, quietly overwhelmed with grief. The loss fractured his marriage. He and Georgia, who had leaned on each other while caring for Richard, now found the pain driving them apart. Their marriage eventually ended, and the sadness began to seep into Red's work. He still performed, but the light in his eyes had dimmed. Behind the painted smile of a clown was a grieving father who never fully healed. What many fans didn't know was that Red had another gift: painting. He began painting as a child, inspired by the circus world he grew up in after his father's death. Over time, he developed a distinctive style, focusing mostly on clowns. Some of his paintings were cheerful, while others reflected loneliness and sorrow. They were deeply personal, connected to the characters he played, especially Freddy. By the 1980s, his art was selling for tens of thousands of dollars, and some experts believed he made more money as a painter than he ever had on television. His lithographs brought in millions annually, and his works ended up in private collections around the world. For Red, painting was not just a hobby but a way to express feelings that comedy couldn't. There was another surprising truth about Red: he never drank alcohol, yet he became famous for playing drunks on stage. One of his most popular sketches was the Guzzler's Gin Act, which helped launch his TV career. His performance was so convincing that people believed he must have had experience with drinking. In reality, Red was allergic to alcohol and couldn't even sip it. He had perfected the act by watching drunks in the streets during his early vaudeville days, copying their slurred speech and clumsy movements with uncanny accuracy. It was pure skill and observation, not lived experience, that made the act so convincing. Behind the camera, Red was not always the wholesome clown that audiences saw on screen. During private rehearsals, he often told dirty jokes and used a sharper, more sarcastic humor that he never shared with the public. Crew members and friends called it the Red Skelton Dirty Hour, and it became a kind of secret tradition among those who worked with him. His wife Lothian once said that Red had a part of his mind reserved for jokes people weren't supposed to hear. It was his way of letting off steam, of balancing the clean comedy he performed for families with a darker side that he kept hidden. After CBS cancelled his show, NBC tried to revive it in 1970. But the new version was very different. It was cut down to 30 minutes, moved to a new time slot, and given a darker set and a group of young supporting actors who disrupted the natural flow. Audiences could tell something was off, and the ratings quickly collapsed. By spring of 1971, the show was cancelled again. Red's television era had officially ended. Still, he refused to change his comedy to match the times. While other comedians embraced shock value, swearing, and controversial topics, Red stuck to clean humor. He believed in respecting his audience, which included children, parents, and grandparents. He once said, "I'm not going to have my audience and their mothers, fathers, children, and grandchildren hear me recite what they can read on bathroom walls." Though some thought this made him old-fashioned, it showed his integrity. He continued to perform live shows across the country, proving that wholesome humor still had a place. In 1980, another controversy arose. 13 of his former writers discovered that Red had included a clause in his will stating that all recordings of the Red Skelton show should be destroyed after his death. If carried out, this would have meant no reruns, no syndication, and no residual payments for the writers. It would have erased decades of work. Red later admitted he had written the clause during a dark period when he felt bitter toward the television industry. After backlash, he reconsidered, asking, "Would you burn the only monument you've built in over 20 years?" Eventually, he agreed to preserve many of the episodes, saving his legacy and the work of those who had helped him create it. Still, the incident showed how much hurt he carried inside. Red's personal life continued to be touched by tragedy. On May 10, 1976, exactly 18 years after their son Richard's death, his ex-wife Georgia Davis took her own life in the backyard of her home. She had battled depression and alcoholism for years, never recovering from losing her child. Red was devastated. Her death, combined with Richard's loss, weighed heavily on him. For more than a decade after, he performed less often, retreating from the spotlight. In 1973, he had remarried. His third wife, Lothian Toland, daughter of famed cinematographer Greg Toland, became his anchor. Together, they lived quietly on a ranch in Anza, California, raising horses and tending bonsai trees. Red wrote her letters every day, and she dedicated herself to preserving his memory after his death. Even without a television show, Red never stopped working. He performed around 70 live shows each year in venues ranging from Carnegie Hall to casinos to college campuses. His art continued to sell for large sums, sometimes earning him as much as $2.5 million a year. Yet, despite his success, he never escaped the sadness of losing Richard and Georgia. Friends said that while he continued to laugh and entertain, the deep joy he once had never fully returned. His clown paintings, bright on the surface, carried a sense of loneliness underneath. They were reflections of a man who had spent his life making others happy while quietly mourning. On September 17, 1997, Red Skelton died of pneumonia at the age of 84, at Eisenhower Medical Center in Rancho Mirage, California. His final years had been spent painting, performing, and living a quieter life, but the shadow of his losses stayed with him until the end. In 2013, his hometown of Vincennes, Indiana, honored him with the opening of the Red Skelton Museum of American Comedy, on what would have been his 100th birthday. The museum, located on the campus of Vincennes University, preserves his costumes, scripts, paintings, and rare footage, ensuring that his legacy lives on. It also hosts events to celebrate comedy, including the America's Clown Award and the Laughter Film Festival. His research archives, filled with scripts, photographs, and music, now belong to the Indiana Historical Society. Red Skelton left behind more than jokes. He created characters that became part of American culture, from Clem Cadiddlehopper to Freddie the Freeloader to the Mean Whittle Kid. His comedy shaped generations, influencing performers like Robin Williams and Jim Carrey. For 20 years, The Red Skelton Show was a staple in homes across America, winning awards and capturing hearts. Even now, decades later, his laughter echoes through time. His story is one of joy, loss, resilience, and love. He was the clown who made the world laugh while carrying his own sadness inside. His legacy is not just in comedy, but in the reminder that even in sorrow, one can still bring light to others.